So this demonstration is primarily designed to give our users an idea of how to leverage authentication endpoints that return tokens. So this can include a number of different schemes, but the one that we're primarily describing here is OAuth. So just to kind of give a little bit of background, the way that OAuth works is that you provide a server with user credentials. In this case, we're going to be using basic auth. That server validates those credentials and returns a token. And then you leverage that token in order to call other endpoints in an authenticated manner. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at how we can emulate that process, or rather follow that process inside of API Fortress. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a request, and it's going to be a post request that we're sending to the Auth server on our demo API. So, it's OAuth/auth. So this is the authentication endpoint that we're actually going to send our user credentials to. We're going to call our variable auth payload. Let's camel case that. It's going to be JSON format because that's what we're expecting back from the server. And next we're going to go to add authentication, which is it's a shortcut. So it's going to add a header in basic auth for us. So we're going to give it the user and password. So it's going to be user1, and the password's going to be 1234 because those are the expected credentials. And we're going to actually see something happen in a moment, which is kind of cool. When I click the green check, we're going to see an authorization header appear. But the authorization header isn't actually the explicit username and password. What we're seeing here is actually a base64 string prepended with the word basic. So what actually just happened is, in basic authentication, the normal expected behavior is that the software is going to take your username and your password, and it's going to concatenate them. And concatenate is just a fancy word for stick together. And then it's going to turn that kind of concatenated or long string into base64, which is what you're seeing here. This is actually technically a numerical representation of your username and password. It's just in a numerical format that we don't often, in the world outside of programming use, which is base64. So now we have our authorization header here. We have our call set up. So the next step, just to kind of make sure that everything's working properly, we're going to go ahead and click Run Test. And our test report will appear, and it looks like we succeeded. So now let's take a deeper dive into what happened here. We're going to click See More, and we're going to click Load Source. And we see here, actually, the message is authentication successful, and our user token is right there. So great. We ran our test, or this very, very limited in scope test that we have here, and we received our token back. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to parameterize that token. And what I mean by that is, we're going to assign it to a name so that we can access it directly. So I'm going to grab the set variable component. And here I'm going to call it, let's call it access token. And we'll use snake case this time, because we like mixing things up here. And the actual value is going to be auth payload dot token. I'm going to click the check here. And now I want to make sure that I'm actually parameterizing this properly. So I'm going to use a comment component, and I'm going to comment out the token variable. And it's not actually called token. So let's make sure we're using the right variable names here. So that's actually access token. I cannot type today. Great. Okay, so access token. So just to kind of follow the logic of what's going on here. We're passing a username and password. That username and password is getting changed into basic auth, which is a base64 string. We're sending a post request to demoapi.apifortress.com, specifically to the OAuth server therein. And then we're receiving back a payload that contains an access token, and we're assigning that to a variable, and we're commenting that variable. So let's run the test and see what happens. And there we go. So we can see right here, this is our comment component. We can see that our token is visible here. So the next step is kind of dependent on your workflow, because we just demonstrated the way to get the token back. So what we'd want to do from here is assign that token perhaps to another header and another follow-on response or something like that, in order to kind of make subsequent authenticated calls. So let's take a look at how our access token actually works in action. So I've taken the liberty of creating two put requests, both to our cart endpoint. And the cart endpoint specifically requires a user token from a user, an authenticated user, which is why we're using it. These put requests are each designed to take a request body that takes a JSON object delineating a product ID and a quantity and put it into the cart for the specific user, and then the server's cache recognizes that user. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because when we run this test, we'll actually see which one works because it has an auth token and that the other one doesn't. So we can see here in this first put request, they're both through the same route, but this one has an authentication header, so user token, and that's set equal to access token, which is the token that we got from before. The second one has a user token header that's set equal to a string that is defined as not a token, in both camel and snake case this time. So we're going to hit run test and see which one of these actually works with the access token that we retrieved. So we'll go ahead and hit run test. And there we go. So we can see our post request, we can see our commented out user token, we can see our first put request with the user token attached as a header, and we can set see more, and we'll see it successfully added over here. And if we go to the second put request, which did not have a user token attached, and click see stack details, we'll see bad user token. So that's the essential workflow for using token-based authentication methods, specifically OAuth. As always, if you guys have any questions, please contact us at support.apifortress.com. And thanks for watching.